Love in the time of war. Bio-armored girl versus Earth officer. Who will win the galaxy? We begin beneath a sky that never saw stars. The deep layer bio-confinement station hummed quietly, its walls thick with shielding and silence. Somewhere beyond those reinforced corridors, buried beneath centuries of black-budget paranoia, a cell pulsed with life, no longer fully human. And down its cold hallway walked a man who didn't yet know he was about to change everything. Lieutenant Ryan Salas was 27 cycles old, born in the Terran Midreach, during the quiet lull between border skirmishes. He stood precisely 185 meters tall, still carried the lean build of academy training, and had that distinct human habit of whistling when nervous. At this particular moment, however, he did not whistle. Because no one whistled on floor 9A, not if they'd read the visitor's manual. He paused before the final blast door. His data pad vibrated, assignment confirmed. Guardian Detail S, Vera. No contact beyond line 3. The pad even included a list of safe topics, weather architecture, planetary cuisine, and a not-so-gentle warning: do not discuss Illyrian Nobility Genetic Status Council affairs. It was by every measure an assignment designed to waste a life. A slow death, except the desk happened to house an heiress once so politically explosive she had to be buried in biotech concrete. You see, most soldiers got guard duty on pirate bases, decaying moons, or some grizzled general's family compound. Rian got a crypt, a royal crypt with a heartbeat. When the inner airlock disengaged, the smell hit first. Not rot, more like ozone and medicinal algae, and something floral that didn't quite belong. He stepped through. The chamber's ceiling loomed high and domed like a cathedral, albeit one with decontamination sprayers and neuroelectric dampeners. In the middle stood a thick glass enclosure ringed with motion sensors. And inside that, seated on a suspended platform like a fossil display, was her, Lady Seraphine Vera. Her armor was unlike anything Ryan had seen, not fabricated, grown. It hugged her limbs in smooth, iridescent layers, pulsing faintly as if it breathed. Thin lines of neural threading crawled from the base of her neck to her spine, twitching like mechanical nerves. She looked up, and for a second Rian forgot she was supposed to be a monster. Another babysitter, she said, her voice distorted by the glass barrier. Her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone whose mind was supposedly damaged. They pinned him like a predator, gauging threat levels. Ryan cleared his throat. I'm not here to babysit. I'm here to understand. There was a silence. Then she laughed, short and joyless. They said that too. Right before they sedated me. No sedatives, he said. Not unless you attack first. She tilted her head as if surprised, then shrugged, armor shifting with a sound like metal sighing. Well, that's already better than the last 3. There was something haunting in how she sat, spine-straight eyes, calculating, yet every movement armored by detachment. Ryan knew the signs. She wasn't mad. She was waiting for what he didn't yet know. But something stirred in him, a low hum in the gut that told him this post wasn't punishment, it was invitation. Why did they really send me? He asked the silence. The glass chamber didn't answer, but from the other side, Seraphine's lips curled just slightly. Maybe, she murmured, because I asked for someone who still believes in the old myths. A shiver ran up his spine. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't a crypt. It was a cocoon, and the thing inside was waking up. You won't be able to stop being curious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Ryan returned the next day. He wasn't sure why. His orders didn't require daily visits, monitoring logs and biometric data would have sufficed. But something about Seraphine lingered, like the taste of old wine, bittersweet, burning, impossible to forget. Maybe it was the eyes, or the armor, or the fact that she hadn't looked afraid of him even a little. He brought a chessboard. It was a little scuffed, a gift from a field commander back during his deployment near the Syndral Expanse. Each piece had been hand-carved. The knights resembled Terran horses, while the queens bore angular Illyrian crowns. He figured the game would at least spark conversation. The moment he placed it on the glass partition shelf, her eyes narrowed. Seriously, she asked, arms crossed over her chest plate. You want to play games with me? Technically, it's training, Rian said smoothly, settling into the seat outside her chamber. Pattern recognition, strategic adaptation. Besides, I heard you were unbeatable at Council War Sims. Her expression froze, and for a moment he thought he'd crossed a line. Then she smirked. Flattery. A primitive tactic. Effective, though. He gestured toward the board. Your move, Lady Vera. She rose, not quickly and not without effort. The armor clung to her joints like wet silk, flowing and reforming as she walked to the partition. She reached through the isolation gauntlets, long gloves designed for controlled physical interaction, and moved a pawn forward. The game began. For several minutes, neither spoke. Ryan found himself oddly focused, tracking her opening like a field maneuver. She played aggressively. Classic Illyrian push-pull. Sacrifice a pawn early, bait the queen, then choke the center. He saw it coming but barely deflected it. Not bad, she muttered, eyes scanning the board. For a Terran. He looked up. You don't sound like someone who's been in isolation for 5 years. 6 years. 3 months. 12 days. Her voice was flat. Not that anyone counted. Rian did. He tapped a rook. You've been alone all that time. Not alone, she said, flicking a bishop across the board. Just surrounded by people who wanted me to disappear. It was the first time her voice cracked. Not much, but enough. Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. What did they do to you, Seraphine? She didn't answer, just stared at him hard, and her armor flared faintly around her collarbones, like the quills of a threatened animal. You mean besides putting me in a cage, she asked. They made me forget how to feel. That's the cruelest part. You lose your memories, your pride, your body. But when you lose your fear, she chuckled softly. That's when they panic. He couldn't argue. Her reflexes, her neurological reactivity, they were well documented. In the classified appendix to her file, someone had described her as genetically overcorrected for trauma response. Whatever that meant. But not your mind, Rian said carefully. You still remember how to win. The queen on her side swept diagonally, capturing his last knight. Check, she smiled, and for the first time it was almost human. Damn right I do. The guards watching from the upper viewing deck whispered among themselves. One of them, Corporal Denix, recorded a time-stamped log. Subject Vera displayed amusement. Emotional deviation noted. Rian ignored them. He pushed the board aside and leaned closer to the glass. You know, he said quietly, you don't have to keep pretending to be a monster. Seraphine blinked. Something flickered across her face. Vulnerability, memory. No recognition. It's not pretend, she whispered. They made me this way. Ryan tapped the glass between them. Maybe, but I think you're more than what they made. Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence, something happened. Her armor just near her jawline shimmered faintly, then receded a millimeter. Not much, but he saw it. So did she. Her hand flew to her throat. She gasped as if feeling skin for the first time in years. What? Was that biotech deactivation? Ryan said, barely able to suppress the grin spreading across his face, triggered by a safe environmental parameter. Maybe trust, maybe hope. She stared at him like he'd just rewritten the laws of nature. Then almost inaudibly, do it again. He leaned back and folded his arms. Then I'll be back tomorrow. The third morning she asked him to bring tea, not replicated real Terran jasmine, the kind that still grew in the northern belts near Lake Athos. Ryan didn't ask how she knew to request it. He just brought it thermally sealed and with a porcelain cup that looked hilariously out of place in the sterility of her confinement cell. It smells like the Imperial Atrium, she said, cradling the cup between her armored palms, though the gauntlet still separated her from actual contact. Before they paved it over for the elections. Rian sat across from her, arms folded, watching. The armor around her throat had receded further. Her speech had grown more fluid, and for the first time her posture leaned not back into the shadows, but forward toward the glass. I did some reading, he said. Your father, High Lord Chiron, was the one who pushed for bioharmonic fusion during the Accord crisis. Seraphine's smile vanished. I know what you're doing, she said softly. Trying to make me remember. Tie me to the past. No, he said. Trying to give you choices again. Memories are fuel, not chains. She studied him for a long moment, then took a careful sip. He was smarter than the council gave him credit for. He knew unity wasn't sustainable. That's why he trained me. Ryan raised an eyebrow. To rule to see. She tapped the glass between them. He taught me how to navigate layers of intent. Every treaty, every ambassador's bow, every silence at a table, it all meant something. I learned to read the void between words. That sounds exhausting. She laughed. It was also fun. She shifted slightly the bioarmor, reacting with a flicker to her emotions. As she reminisced, a soft, iridescent glow shimmered along her forearms and dissipated more signs of neural modulation, less reflexive tension. Then the assassination happened, she said abruptly. Ryan's spine straightened. I've read the file. They said you detonated the countermeasure yourself. I survived the countermeasure, she corrected, voice cold. My father designed a gene lock, a fail-safe hidden in our line since the third collapse. It triggers when neurological overload is detected. The armor. The reflexes. They're not weapons. They're healing. Rian's breath caught. You mean the armor isn't punishment, it's a cocoon? Her eyes narrowed. Exactly. But the council didn't see it that way. They saw a creature, not a daughter. And monsters, Lieutenant, don't inherit titles. Ryan felt a weight settle in his chest. The betrayal, the fear, the politics. It all made sense now, not as a power play, but as cowardice dressed in ceremony. And they locked you away, he said, voice tight, because they were afraid of what you might become. No, Seraphine whispered. They were afraid I'd remember what they did. The silence stretched long and brittle. Finally, she leaned in, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped, an octave calm, calculating, terrifying in its clarity. I want to see the stars again, Rian. Not simulations. Real stars. And I want my name back. He didn't hesitate. Then we'll find a way. As the session ended, Ryan filed the standard psychological report, this time noting, subject has expressed coherent memory reconstruction and independent volition. Signs of identity reclamation. Recommend extended social interaction. The station director flagged it, but no objections came down. Yet. That night in his quarters, Ryan stared at an encrypted file he'd received from an anonymous source 2 days prior. It was a voice log, crackling with static but unmistakable. Hi, Lord Chiron's voice. If you're reading this, you've reached her. And you're not a fool. That means you're the one. Rian listened in stunned silence as the message unfurled a dying father's plan. Not to hide his daughter, but to test the galaxy. If she finds someone who treats her as human first, not as heir, not as weapon, then perhaps there's hope for our future. Ryan closed his eyes. No pressure then. The next morning when he entered her cell, Seraphine was waiting. I dreamt of the sky last night, she said. There was a silver comet and a voice telling me, you don't have to run anymore. She looked at him. Was that you? No, he said gently. But I think I know who it was. The glow around her faded armor receding further. Her fingers for the first time curled bare against the teacup. He found her standing when he returned. No armor, no glass barrier. Just Seraphine, barefoot, vulnerable, wrapped in a pale tunic like some half-forgotten myth, breathing again. The chamber was still lined with sensors, the neurodampener still hummed, but none of them pulsed red. She had deactivated the bioarmor herself. Ryan stopped at the threshold. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. You were right, she said simply. I usually am, he replied, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Her eyes rolled. Don't ruin the moment, Solace. He took a tentative step forward. You're glowing. Residual bioluminescence. She flexed a hand, watching the faint shimmer fade. Apparently, I still sparkle when I'm emotionally regulated. Should I be flattered, he asked. You should be cautious, she shot back. This only works if I trust you. Ryan nodded, stepping beside her. She wasn't trembling. Her voice wasn't cold. She was warm in the way a wounded animal begins to lower its hackles, not because danger has vanished, but because hope has. He extended his hand slowly. She took it. The moment their palms touched, Ryan's neural chip buzzed with alarm, just a flicker, then silence. The station didn't react. The chamber didn't seal. Nothing exploded. He exhaled. Progress. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Let me show you something. She led him to the far wall, what had once been a blank surface. She placed her hand on a hidden panel, and with a gentle hiss, a hologram bloomed outward, unfurling layers of encrypted projections maps. Council logs, ship routes, private votes. This is my archive, she said. I built it before the incident, before my exile. The council doesn't know it still exists. Rian stared at the data. You were spying on the council. I was guiding it, she corrected. As strategist Vera, I built our foreign policy from the shadows. My father knew the public wouldn't trust a young woman without a title, but they trusted results. And when you turned down their alliance, he asked quietly, they turned on me. Her fingers danced across the projection, revealing a recording grainy but intact. A council session. Malik Tharn speaking to Commander Kahl in hushed tones. She refuses to align with Sector Cyril. Chiron is wavering too. We may need to ensure inheritance bypass. Rian clenched his jaw. You were betrayed, he said. She nodded. I kept this to remind myself it wasn't madness. I didn't imagine it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Ryan whispered, we need to get this out. This changes everything. Seraphine's gaze hardened again. Not yet. The moment we reveal this, they'll kill us. I need time. We need support. He nodded slowly. Then we build it, one piece at a time. They stared at the projection data, pulsing like veins of light, and neither of them noticed how close they'd come until their shoulders touched. Her head tilted slightly toward him. Why are you doing this? Because you're not a monster, he said, his voice barely audible. And because maybe monsters deserve someone to believe in them too. Her breath caught. The light between them pulsed. Not with warning, but with resonance. They didn't kiss. Not yet. That came later. But in that moment, the air thickened between them with something deeper than romance. Recognition. When he left the chamber, the guards didn't meet his gaze. They had seen the footage, the physical contact, the mutual trust, and not one dared flag it, because the readings told another story. Seraphine Vera was stabilizing, rapidly. Later that night, alone in his bunk, Ryan opened the encrypted message from the archive again. This time it came with coordinates, not of the station, but of a backup safe house, an Illyrian border outpost long thought decommissioned. Charon's voice echoed one final time. If she finds the strength to awaken, guide her there. She'll know what to do, and if she still trusts you, she won't awaken alone. The next time they met, she was already waiting by the reinforced transfer gate, one hand casually resting on the panel, as if daring someone to deny her motion clearance. I want to go outside, Seraphine said. Rian didn't flinch. That's not protocol. She raised an eyebrow, unamused. Neither is not reporting the neural resonance spike between us yesterday. He had to smile at that. So you did check the logs. I'm still a Vera, she said, and something in her tone made it sound like a name worth wearing again. They stood in silence, the low hum of the station, a familiar background tension. Rian knew what he was about to do was technically treason, but what he was witnessing, this uncoiling of something both ancient and tender, felt more real than any regulation. Fine, he said. 20 minutes. But I picked the direction. They took the service lift up 3 levels to the old atmospheric dome, the only part of the station that wasn't pitch metal and fluorescence. It wasn't much, just a crescent of artificial landscape designed for calibration testing, a patch of moss, simulated sun, a single withered tree that had somehow outlived 5 generations of janitorial oversight. Seraphine stood under it, lifting her face to the dome light. Her eyes fluttered closed. I used to sneak away to the wind gardens of Helios Bridge, she murmured. Climb the stone lattice. Fall asleep on the warm silver roots. Ryan watched her. You miss it. She opened her eyes again, and he saw the answer long before she spoke it. I miss who I was in those moments, she whispered, before I started seeing plots in every kindness, before I realized loyalty could be transactional. He reached into his coat and pulled something from his inner pocket, a sealed photo, old faded. It showed a much younger Seraphine, no armor, no edge, just a laughing girl beside a tall man with the sharp eyes of a leader, her father. Found this in the station's archive basement, buried behind 7 years of requisition logs. She took it from him carefully, her fingers trembling. I haven't seen this in... I thought they destroyed everything. Some things survive, he said gently, even when no one wants them to. Seraphine stared at the photo for a long while. Then without ceremony, she sat down on the moss, folding her legs beneath her like a girl in prayer. You know, she said, the armor is still there, dormant, waiting. I know. It could come back. Ryan sat beside her. Then I'll remind you who you are until it doesn't need to. She turned to face him, lips parting in slow disbelief. Why? Because someone should have done it a long time ago. There it was again, that thing in the air. Not heat, not tension. Something older. Something that could only grow where trust was earned by presence, not promises. She reached over, placed her hand over his, and this time there was no gauntlet, no trembling, just skin. Human. Thank you, she said. For what? For sitting with me. For not running. For letting me be this. He squeezed her hand. You don't owe anyone a transformation story. They sat like that until the light dimmed on its pre-programmed cycle, stars flickering into the dome in a poor imitation of the real thing. But Seraphine didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching for assassins. She was watching the stars, and she was smiling. Later that night, a silent alarm triggered in the upper warden's control deck. A residual power bleed from the confinement ring. It wasn't from a security breach. It was from deactivation, systematic and internal. The armor had receded 32%, a record. Meanwhile, in a private message queue set to manual encryption, envoy Malik Tharn received a single update: Project Vera status high risk. Recommend termination protocol, C, window closing. Tharn frowned, his expression unreadable in the dim blue of the Citadel's surveillance chamber. She's waking up, he muttered. Too fast. He turned to Commander Urin Kal, who stood silently nearby. Prepare the fallback strike. The briefing chamber deep within the Council's orbital citadel had no windows. That was by design. No distractions, no escapes. Envoy Malik Tharn stood at the center of a multi-tiered dais, reviewing the security feeds from Station 9A. The images projected around him were clinical biometric readouts, audio fragments, time-stamped logs, but what they showed was anything but sterile. Lady Seraphine Vera was no longer dormant. Her armor had withdrawn to 14% active coverage. She was vocal, cognizant, and most alarmingly, she was touching people. She should still be feral, Tharn muttered. The gene seal wasn't supposed to unravel without significant trauma. Across from him, Commander Urin Kal leaned against the projection console, arms crossed, a small scar above his brow catching the light. She didn't need trauma. She needed empathy. That fool of a lieutenant gave her exactly what we spent years avoiding. Tharn exhaled sharply. Then it's time to act. We have assets in the station, Kal offered. A containment failure. Neuroflare leak. No need for witnesses. Too crude, Tharn said. And Solace is too popular in the Terran ranks. A death now raises questions. So Kal asked. Assassins then, Tharn tapped the screen. No, we ruin her the old way. Discredit, isolation, and if that fails, he didn't finish the sentence. Across the void of space on the edge of the Illyrian Reach, Ryan stared at the encrypted map Seraphine had unlocked for him. This place, he said, spinning the hollow image. It's real? She nodded. My father had it built off-grid, a fallback site. Only a handful of people knew it existed, and most of them, well, conveniently assassinated, Ryan offered. Conveniently loyal, she corrected, and quietly silenced. She hovered her hand over a flashing icon. But if there's even one left, one voice that remembers House Vera, not as rumor but legacy, then we still have a chance. He looked at her then, really looked. No armor, no rage, just her still regal, still dangerous, but grounded. You're not afraid. I am, she admitted, but I don't let fear dictate direction, only timing. The lights flickered once, a signal, trouble. Ryan's comm pinged with an encrypted burst from an anonymous source. It took 3 decryption layers to parse, and when it did, his stomach turned cold. Target acquisition approved, Project Vera. Termination protocol, C-72HRS. He showed it to her. She didn't blink. Good, she said. Then they're predictable. Ryan frowned. You're glad they're coming. They think I'm still that girl in the glass cell, she said, rising. Let them. He followed her to the far wall, where she opened another hidden panel, revealing a travel core interface long thought dormant. You're not just planning to run, he realized. You're planning a message. She nodded. We won't sneak out. She touched the panel. We'll walk. The old diplomatic corridor, a long-abandoned emergency access path once used by Illyrian officials, lit up with pale blue emergency lights. I still have clearance codes, she said, inherited through bloodline. Unless they've scrubbed the system in the last 6 years. They haven't, Rian cut in, scanning his own UEC chip. Terran clearance still recognized. She smiled faintly. My father was smarter than any of them guessed. That evening, as they packed to leave, Seraphine paused before sealing the chamber. I need to ask, she said, her voice quiet. When this escalates, and it will, are you still going to be here? Rian didn't hesitate. Always. She studied his face, searching for the flicker of doubt. She found none. I've never had an always before, she said. He stepped close. Then let me be your first. And when she kissed him lightly, like the memory of a kiss, rather than the promise of one, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was knowing. Outside, in the lowest shadows of the station, 2 council agents activated cloaking fields and moved toward the chamber's coordinates. Inside, Ryan and Seraphine were already gone. The Illyrian border was a graveyard of ambition. Out here, old dynasties once carved their names into moons, and merchant fleets charted paths with blood and trade. Now abandoned outposts floated like empty sarcophagi, half swallowed by debris rings and time. Ryan's ship, a sleek courier-class transport modified with a stealth core, dropped from hyperspace near an asteroid cluster known locally as the Veil. It shimmered faintly with the residual trails of long-dead jump routes. There, Seraphine said, pointing at a small planetoid tucked behind a collapsed mining array. See that indentation? That's the entry lock, the fallback base. Rian piloted in with a practiced ease, gliding through the dust cloud like a knife through silk. As they approached, ancient defense turrets flickered to life, then blinked once and shut down. They remember me, Seraphine murmured. Or at least, my blood. They docked in silence. The airlock hissed open, revealing a long corridor lined with faded sigils, House Vera's crest etched in burnished silver. It was beautiful in a forgotten kind of way. Inside the main hall, dust danced in the half-light of still-functioning sconces. A hollow statue of Chiron Vera stood dormant at the far end, eyes cast in marble resolve. And as they stepped past the motion sensors, the statue's eyes lit with a soft blue glow. Voice recognition enabled it, said in a low, familiar tone, Seraphine, my daughter. Welcome home. Ryan froze. That's his voice. She nodded, her throat tight. He left these recordings here, stored in genetic locks. Watch. She placed her hand against a panel, and the statue shimmered, projecting a holographic log, a younger Chiron, regal in council robes, speaking directly into the archive. If this reaches you, he said, then the council's gamble failed, and you survived. Good. His face was haggard but proud. You were never meant to be a shadow. I taught you to see because I believed one day you'd have to rebuild in the dark. If you find this base, then your enemy is not simply the council. It is the idea that they can bury the truth and still rule. He leaned forward. And if the one beside you now is who I hoped he would be, then you are not alone. The projection ended. Silence followed. Then Seraphine turned to Ryan, her voice steady. He chose you. I'm starting to believe that, he said softly. They spent the next hours activating the dormant system's data cores, surveillance relays, encrypted satellites hidden in orbit. What they found was staggering. Logs, recordings, full council meetings secretly archived by Chiron's network, moments of backdoor dealings, vote manipulations, the unredacted truth. Seraphine's eyes burned as she reviewed each file. They tore us apart from the inside, and then they blamed the unrest on external instability. She paused over one clip, Tharn offering Commander Kal a seat on the restructured council in exchange for his loyalty. I trusted him, she said, voice cracking, for the first time. He was at my naming ceremony. You still have people who believe in you, Rian said gently. We just need to find them. He triggered the communication array, and initiated a low-band signal, an old Illyrian encryption string, the kind only the old guard would recognize. "You think anyone's still out there?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "People don't forget hope. They just bury it." And sure enough, within an hour, responses began to ping back. Encrypted, cautious, but real. To the lady in exile. "We thought you were gone. Say the word. We're ready." Rian watched her shoulders straighten, watched the steel return, not as armor, but as purpose. Seraphine stood in the middle of the room, head held high, and said, "Then let's give them the word." And in the shadows of a crumbling empire, a whisper began to rise. "Vera lives. Council security has flagged an anomaly," Cal reported, pacing the length of Malik Tharn's office. "Encrypted pings across old Illyrian diplomatic channels. Short burst signals. Tight bandwidth. But they're spreading." Tharn steepled his fingers, skin pale against the ambient glow of the Citadel's surveillance feeds. "Is it her?" Cal gave a single nod. "She's broadcasting from somewhere near the Veil. We've triangulated it down to a cluster of derelict mining installations. She's found something." Tharn's jaw tightened. "We spent a decade scrubbing the Vera legacy. We cannot let her resurrect it." Cal smirked faintly. "Then give the order." "Not yet," Tharn said, standing. "This is delicate. A public assassination creates a martyr, but discrediting her, that creates silence." And Salas Kal asked, "He's the symbol now, the Terran officer who fell for the monster." Tharn's gaze sharpened. "Then let's make him look like the monster. Half a sector away under the silver glass dome of the fallback base." Ryan examined the ancient defense console. Seraphine stood behind him, eyes fixed on the slowly pulsing map. Each glowing dot a returning ally, each one a risk. 15 responses, she whispered. "More than I thought we'd get." Ryan tapped one signal. "This one's from Arden Keep. Isn't that where your father held the border accords?" She nodded. "They're traditionalists. If they're reaching out now, it means they're ready to defy the council." They spent hours crafting their response part, manifesto, part memorial. It was Seraphine's voice that carried it, calm, fierce, and utterly clear. "People of the Accord, I am Seraphine Vera. I was not lost. I was buried. But you know who I am. You remember what House Vera stood for." She paused. "And now I ask you to remember it again." The message went out on secure threads routed through old couriers and disguised merchant relays. Within a day, more signals returned. But with support came retaliation. The ambush came at dawn. Ryan had taken the outer deck for maintenance when the alarms triggered short, sharp chirps. External contact. Unauthorized. "Seraphine, we've got incoming," he shouted, sprinting down the central access ramp. She met him at the bottom, already armored. Not the old armor, the monstrous biological shell that had once made people fear her. This one was different. Slimmer, sleek, controlled. A hybrid interface she had configured herself from the fallback base's old systems. A suit of choice, not reaction. Rian raised his sidearm. "They'll expect you to hide." She shook her head. "I've done enough hiding." They breached the outer perimeter in pairs, council security dressed in black reflective suits, faces masked behind mirrored visors. Rian fired first. Not to kill stun rounds only, but Seraphine moved like a dance of blades, her new armor flashing with guided pulses. Non-lethal strikes. Targeted. She didn't destroy. She disabled. "They're not trying to kill us," Rian shouted, ducking behind a pylon. "No," she said, voice tight. "They're trying to capture us and discredit us later." A council agent lunged at her. She sidestepped, twisted the man's weapon from his grasp, and dropped him with a pulse to the spine. "I was trained by Chiron Vera," she said between breaths. "This is a child's brawl." And then suddenly the attackers withdrew. Ryan stood catching his breath. "That's it." "No," Seraphine whispered, retrieving a blinking device from one of the agent's belts. "They weren't here to take us. They were here to plant this." The device pulsed. Ryan scanned it and paled. "It's a council-grade forge, a narrative disruptor." She swore under her breath. "They're going to fabricate evidence, twist the feeds, make it look like we faked the whole message." "Can you counter it?" he asked. She held the device up. "I am the counter." With a quick slice of her blade, she destroyed it. But the implication lingered like smoke. They had made their move. Now the council would escalate. Back in the orbital citadel, Tharn's voice was calm as ever. They survived. Kal raised an eyebrow. Unfortunate. No, Tharn said. Expected. Let them play the hero. Let them gather support. And when the time is right, we break them in public. He smiled coldly. We just need one leak, one doubt, and the masses will turn. The outpost mess hall was an echo chamber of old times, battered steel counters, half-working lighting, and a mural on one wall depicting the twin moons of Illyria rising over a line of armored guards. Seraphine stood in front of it, tracing the outlines of the mural with her finger. These were the Loyal Six, my father's last personal guard. Ryan glanced at the names under each figure. Any of them still alive? She gave a half-smile. If they are, they'll be watching us right now, waiting to see if I still deserve their oath. As if summoned by the very invocation of loyalty, the main doors slid open with an archaic hiss, and 3 figures stepped inside. All were old, not by human standards, but by military ones. Hardened, weary, dressed in outmoded but impeccably maintained armor, marked with the Vera crest. The one in the center removed his helmet. Lady Seraphine. She didn't flinch. Captain Rian Voss. He knelt immediately. We thought you were dead. I was, she said softly, in every way that mattered. Ryan stood a step behind, suddenly aware of the historical weight in the room. These weren't just bodyguards. They were relics of a lost order. People who had pledged their lives not to a council, not to an empire, but to her. Voss rose, studying Rian. And this is Lieutenant Rian Solis, she said. The man who reminded me I was more than what they buried. Voss nodded once. Then he has my respect. He stepped aside as more boots echoed down the corridor. 6, 7, 8 figures, each bearing some emblem of the old guard. They hadn't died. They had waited. And now they returned. Rian whispered, We have a garrison. No, Seraphine said. We have a family. That night around the old fire pit in the atrium, the stories began. A grizzled engineer described the sabotage of vote tallies during the 5th partition crisis. A former diplomat admitted to forging Seraphine's psychiatric detainment report. Every tale painted the same picture, a council afraid not of war, but of truth. They knew your father was building a new accord, Voss said. One where houses would serve the people, not the other way around. And that truth, Seraphine said, her voice rising, was what they tried to drown in silence. Ryan sat close beside her, noting how different she looked now. Not just the armor, though, that too had changed again, forming elegant geometric plates, more ceremonial than combative, but her eyes, clear, determined. No longer the feral survivor. She was strategizing again. Tomorrow, she said, we launched the signal burst. Uncut, no edits. My face, my voice, their secrets. It'll paint a target on your back, Rian warned. She looked at him. Then they'll have to hit a moving one. At dawn, the message went live. Across the sector, the broadcast reached every ship station and info hub on legacy Vera channels. No encryption, just a looped feed of Seraphine speaking plainly, powerfully. My name is Seraphine Vera. You were told I died. You were told I was mad. You were told I was monstrous. She paused. None of it was true. The message went viral in seconds. Civilian channels picked it up. Pirate bands rebroadcast it out of sheer disbelief. Even rival noble houses froze. And then, predictably, the council responded. A press release from the orbital citadel. Disgraced heiress Seraphine Vera, believed deceased, has resurfaced in an act of terror and propaganda. Citizens are advised to disregard any unverified transmissions and report any collaborators immediately. But the damage was done. The galaxy now had a choice, the monster or the myth. And in the border sectors, on stations starved of hope, whispers grew louder. Vera lives, and she remembers. Later that evening, as the base's generators purred quietly, Ryan and Seraphine stood together on the outer deck, looking up at the stars. You know what this means, he said. They'll come in force, she replied, not just to kill, to erase. You ready? She didn't answer right away. Then, with the kind of quiet resolve that echoed through centuries, she said, No, but I'm willing. He reached out, took her hand. You don't have to do it alone. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it possible. In the darkness, the stars did not blink, but the watchtowers of forgotten warriors began to glow. The loyal were waking. The night before their departure, it rained inside the dome. Not by accident, by design. The fallback base had a weather simulation system used to mimic planetary environments mainly for troop acclimatization. Seraphine had reactivated it, calibrated it to match the spring monsoons of Illyria's third continent, and now stood barefoot in the artificial rain, letting it soak into her tunic, her hair, her skin. Ryan watched her from the doorway. It's not real, she murmured, not turning around. Still looks wet, he replied, stepping in beside her. She glanced at him, her eyes gleaming. It smells like the North Gardens. They used to release jasmine oils during ceremonies. Scent memory is harder to suppress than visual. They walked under the drizzle in silence for a few minutes, water dripping from the canopy above like silver threads. It wasn't cold, but it had weight. Gravity made even artificial rain feel heavy when your heart was tired. Ryan touched her arm. You could still back out. She gave him a look, equal parts gratitude and exasperation. You know I won't. Yeah, he said. But I figured I'd ask. One last time. She smiled, a sad one. It's not about revenge, Ryan. It never was. It's about remembrance. If I die tomorrow, I want them to remember that I chose to be seen. Not as a weapon, not as a mistake, but as myself. He took her hand gently, reverently, and drew her close. They didn't speak, not with words. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It didn't crescendo with music or prophecy. It was quiet, soft, and full of history, a promise written in skin. Her lips were cold from the rain. His heart was beating too fast. But the moment was still. When they broke apart, she touched his jaw. Promise me something, anything. Don't become them, no matter what happens. He nodded. Never. She turned back to the dome's open center, letting the rain fall on her upturned face. Then I'm ready. The next morning, armor gleamed in the base's hangar. Old suits refurbished by Rian Vos and the other loyalists. Their materials were outdated tungsten blend pre-fusion ceramics, but the pride in them was brand new. Seraphine stepped into her custom interface suit. It had evolved again, leaner, less jagged, a synthesis of her bioreactive layer and conventional plating, tempered by her emotional stability. When she moved, it didn't hiss. It sang. Rian donned his officer-grade exoshell, slinging a compact repeater across his back. He wore no insignia, only a single sigil on his left pauldron Vera. The ship they took was old but fast, a stealth-modified diplomatic courier, with experimental cloaking tech from the Veyron archives. Voss handed Rian the ignition key with a grim nod. Coordinates locked, the old captain said. The Citadel won't expect a frontal insertion. Seraphine's voice was calm. That's why we're giving them one. As they launched, the fallback base began a full system wipe. Not in retreat, but in defiance. There would be no sanctuary after this, only forward. Hours later, in high orbit above the Citadel, their ship emerged from cloak within a kilometer of the outer tower. The alarms didn't even have time to activate. Seraphine moved first, breaching the outer shell, with a pulse rip keyed to her father's override codes. Rian followed through the breach, covering her flank. The halls of the Citadel looked the same, polished floors, sterile walls, the cold hum of institutional power. But to Seraphine, every corner was a memory. Here she had debated war protocol. There she had refused Malik Tharn's proposed alliance. The walls echoed with ghosts. Guards intercepted them at corridor junctions. Not many, not enough. Seraphine moved with purpose, disabling without killing. Her armor adapted fluidly, pulse fields redirecting stuns and shock bolts. They moved like a rumor turned real. By the time they reached the main council chamber, the room was already in disarray. Tharn stood at the center, flanked by 2 advisors and 3 guards. He looked older, but not wiser. Well, he said coolly, the monster returns. Seraphine stepped forward, eyes level. I was never the monster, just the mirror, Tharn sneered. You think this little stunt will change anything? The public doesn't want truth. They want order. She smiled faintly. Then it's a good thing I brought both. She raised her hand and activated the hollow projector embedded in her palm. Kiran Vera's final message flooded the chamber, casting a ghost across every surface. The recording was clear, damning, inescapable. My daughter is the only one capable of leading a new accord. Chiron's voice rang out. And the one who helps her heal is the one who will make her whole. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Seraphine's voice cut through the shock. Your lies die here. It was the silence after Chiron's voice that hurt the most. Not the accusations, not the drama, just the raw, hollow quiet of a room full of people who knew they'd been caught. Counselor Vale, the oldest member of the Accord panel, was the first to speak. Is this authenticated? Rian stepped forward, holding up the data slate containing the original logs time-stamped and verified by deep code hash from the Vera archives. Triple confirmed. Old Accord signature traces still intact. You can run a spectral trace on the quantum sinks if you like. Val took the slate with shaking hands. Tharn's voice was a blade. This changes nothing. Oh, it changes everything, Seraphine said. She walked slowly into the center of the chamber, each step deliberate. Her armor disengaged piece by piece, retracting into the suit's internal lattice until she stood once more as herself. No exosuit, no defense system, just Seraphine. I'm not here to seize power, she said. I'm here to claim what was denied me not by defeat, but by deceit. She turned to the rest of the chamber, locking eyes with each counselor in turn. You cast me out when I needed you most. You branded me mad, monstrous, and treasonous because I dared to refuse, because I questioned alliances that would have sold our people to the highest bidder. And now she said, you will listen. Tharn moved first. He reached for the emergency override on the central podium, a kill switch designed to flush the chamber and rewrite all logs within 60 seconds. Ryan drew his weapon. Don't! Tharn froze hand inches from the panel. You think this will make people follow her, Tharn hissed. They'll never trust a broken heir, a political relic, a freak. Seraphine didn't flinch. You're right. Not everyone will trust me, but they'll trust the truth. From the chamber's rear entrance came a sudden influx of movement-armed figures in legacy armor. Voss and the Loyal Six. Dozens more forming a protective circle around the dais. Tharn looked around, realization dawning. You planned this, he whispered. Seraphine nodded. From the moment I woke up. Kayal, standing quietly in the corner, finally spoke. You used us. You baited this confrontation. Yes, she said, and it worked. The chamber doors slammed shut as the emergency quorum assembled council representatives from every major Accord world. It was no longer just a meeting. It was now officially a ruling. The deliberation was brief. The evidence is overwhelming. The betrayal by Tharn and Kayal undeniable. By vote 23-4, the council rescinded Seraphine's exile. By further motion 17-10, they reinstated her title, though not as a figurehead. Lady Seraphine Vera is hereby recognized as co-sovereign of the Illyrian region, Val declared, with full authority to reform its political infrastructure. Rian stood beside her watching history buckle and then begin to straighten. You did it, he whispered. No, she said, voice trembling. We did. Later, alone in the private quarters reserved for ruling dignitaries, Seraphine sat on the edge of the velvet-sealed window nook, watching stars flicker like thoughts she hadn't had time to think. Ryan came in quietly, setting down 2 cups of jasmine tea. You keep that stuff like a ritual, she said. It calms you, he replied. I read the logs. Scent regulation helps stabilize your neurosynapse flow. She arched her brow. You read my neurochemistry I wanted to understand, he said, sitting beside her. You're not easy to read, Seraphine, but you're worth it. She didn't respond with words. She leaned in gently this time and kissed him, not with longing, but with recognition. This was not a beginning. This was a return. 2 people who had already found each other rediscovering what they'd always carried. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I don't know what kind of world we've just created. Neither do I, Rian said, but it's one you get to build. The next day, public feeds across the sector ran with a new title, Lady Vera Returns. A monster no more. But Seraphine didn't read the headlines. She was already back at work clearing corrupted protocols, reinstating fair elections, in the outer moons reestablishing communication with Accord minorities. Rian handled the logistics. They shared an office, sometimes a bed, always a purpose. And on a clear morning not long after Seraphine stood on the edge of the orbital gardens, No armor, no crowd, watching the rebuilt banners rise. She turned to Rian. Do you believe in redemption? He shrugged. Only if it comes with jasmine tea. She laughed. And the stars once again remembered her name. 3 weeks into the new accord, Seraphine's hands no longer trembled when she addressed the public. She no longer rehearsed her speeches in secret, no longer second-guessed every syllable or wondered if people saw her as something less or worse, something more than human. But healing wasn't linear, and peace had sharp edges. They found the first signs of sabotage in the Illyrian water systems, coded enzymes meant to destabilize neuroregulators. Not lethal, just enough. Enough to make people irritable, fearful, enough to undo trust. Seraphine reviewed the data with Rian beside her. This is council-grade biotech, he muttered, frowning. She nodded, but deployed subtly, a whisper instead of a scream. Someone's still playing the long game. She folded her hands together, composing herself. Then we adapt, like we always do. That evening, as emergency decontamination began, Seraphine sat on the marble bench outside the old chamber garden, the one where her father used to read her political histories as bedtime stories. Ryan found her there, legs curled beneath her like the girl she used to be, fingers absent-mindedly tracing the grooves in the bench. You're quiet, he said. I'm tired, she admitted, not the kind sleep can fix. He sat beside her. You know, she said softly when the armor first came. It didn't hurt, not physically, but it was like a scream I couldn't stop hearing, my own mind fracturing. She looked at him, eyes shining but unshed. But then you spoke to me, like I wasn't broken, like I was just paused. He reached out, brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. You weren't paused. You were surviving. And now you're living. They sat in the growing twilight, the kind that blurs memory and possibility. Somewhere nearby, an old song played from a worker's terminal, a Terran ballad, slow and aching. Seraphine closed her eyes. When I was small, she whispered, I used to believe love was weakness, that if you cared too much, you'd be used, exploited, broken. And now, he asked again. She opened her eyes. Now I know love is what makes survival worth it. They didn't speak after that, just held hands in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for permission. Across the citadel, Tharn's old quarters had been sealed and cleared, except for one thing. Hidden in the paneling behind his private observatory, Ryan found a locked drive, one too old for council tech to parse easily. It hummed faintly with dark energy signatures, and when decrypted, it displayed only one file, Project Tithon. Seraphine reviewed the contents in stages. It was horrifying. Tithon wasn't a plan to suppress Seraphine. It was a contingency plan for all highborn Accord heirs. A system to trigger latent genetic suppressors in any individual deemed a political risk. Tharn didn't fear me because I was unstable, she said. He feared me because I wasn't, because I adapted. Ryan's voice was grim. How many more like you? She looked up pale. We don't know. She called an emergency session. Within hours, leaders from over 30 sectors had convened, some in person, others via holorelays. The evidence was undeniable. Tithon was real, and it threatened not just politics but personal sovereignty across generations. In the chamber, a young representative from Thalassethor stood and asked, What do we do now? Seraphine rose slowly. We make it public. All of it. We don't just heal, we expose. We ensure the monsters who made Tithon can never hide again. A moment of stunned silence. Then one by one, voices echoed, I. It passed unanimously. That night, Ryan poured her a glass of aged Terran whiskey, the kind reserved for victories and funerals. She sniffed it. Smells like overconfidence. He raised his glass. To difficult women and stubborn men. She clinked hers against his. To the future. Then paused, and added with a smirk. But mostly to the fact that I'm not glowing anymore. He grinned. I noticed. She took a slow sip. That means I'm not in a crisis? No, he said, eyes soft. It means you're home, and in a way that no palace, no title, no legacy ever could as she was. The attack came on the 43rd day, not from within, not even from the crumbling council loyalists, but from outside a coalition of fringe warlords and rogue states who saw Seraphine's resurgence as a threat to the old balance of power. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't negotiate. They arrived with a fleet. 3 dreadnoughts, 12 frigates, and 1 command carrier, all bristling with stolen tech and rage sharpened by exile. The Terran defense grid picked up their entrance 2 hours before atmospheric breach. Seraphine didn't panic. She stood calmly in the Citadel's strategic chamber, flanked by her reformed loyalists, her advisors and Ryan now wearing the midnight blue shoulder tabs of Illyrian's newly sanctioned protectorate force. "They think they can scare us back into silence," she said. Voss stepped forward. "Ma'am, with respect, this is a fleet. You have a name, but they have firepower." Seraphine nodded. "And firepower is a blunt tool, easily broken if you understand its weight." She turned to Ryan. "Deploy the archive protocol." He blinked. "You're serious?" "Absolutely." Archive protocol was a relic of the old Vera defenses, Chiron's masterpiece, not a superweapon, but a cognitive strike. Using neural harmonics, the system hijacked enemy targeting systems, corrupted navigation schematics, and most ingeniously broadcast historical memory loops across enemy channels. That's right, she weaponized context. As the rogue fleet reached orbital range, their internal comms filled with cascading clips. Peaceful Illyrian ceremonies, images of Seraphine as a child in council sessions. Her speeches, Chiron's final message. Then came the transmissions from council defectors, now aligned with her, each voice a nail in the coffin of their justification. One rogue commander screamed, "They're brainwashing us," another muttered, "She's not what they said." By the time they made landfall, only 3 ships dared launch shuttles. Only one reached the surface. And when it did, Seraphine was waiting not with soldiers, but with witnesses, civilians, diplomats, even war orphans. She stood among them, her hands empty, her armor absent. The rogue squad disembarked in confusion. No barricades, no gunfire, just a woman. She spoke once, you were lied to. So was I. And then the feed went global. Every channel, every stream. People saw it, her courage, her calm, her refusal to meet fire with fire. And in that moment, something broke in the enemy. The rogue commander removed his helmet, stared at her for a long time, and dropped his rifle. He knelt. The rest followed. 2 hours later, the rogue fleet disengaged and retreated. They left their warships behind, left their prisoners, their logs, their doubts, and they left with a new message. She did not fight us. She changed us. In the days that followed, Seraphine's approval ratings across the Accord sectors spiked to record highs. Systems that once labeled her a heretic now requested delegation from her provisional council. But she remained cautious. She knew what Ryan had known all along. Adoration was as dangerous as fear. "It's not the love that kills you," she said. "It's what people do in its name." She spent her afternoons in policy briefings, her evenings in code restructuring, and her nights when she allowed herself time with Ryan. Their relationship had become the worst-kept secret in the Citadel. But no one dared politicize it, because it was real. One night, watching the orbital shields reset after another cyber scan, she turned to him in their shared quarters and said, "You do realize I still don't know how this ends." He leaned against the frame of the window. "That's the point. It doesn't. We keep building. They'll try again. Someone always does." She smiled, but there was iron in her voice. "Then let them come." The next day, she made a declaration. She would not assume sole rulership of Illyria. Instead, a dual leadership system would be enacted, one civilian, one military, balanced, accountable, transparent. She stood at the podium, cameras watching from every corner of the galaxy. "I was shaped by betrayal," she said, "but I will not let betrayal shape the future." And then, without fanfare, she named Ryan Salas as her co-leader. The audience gasped, not because of the surprise, but because it made sense. The one who walked with her through the fire, the one who stayed when everyone else fled. She turned to him and smiled. "You don't have to say yes." He stepped forward, squeezed her hand, and said only, "I already did. The day I knocked on your door." The ceremony was held under open stars, not in a gilded chamber, not beneath stained glass or ancient halls, but on the Citadel's upper stratospheric garden, rebuilt to resemble the silver root terraces of Helios Bridge, the place where Seraphine used to climb and dream before she learned the cost of power. Now it was where she'd redefine it. The guests came without titles. Even those with crowns wore simple robes blending into the crowd. No hierarchy, just humanity. Some were old enemies. Many were former skeptics. All of them were witnesses. As the pair stood at the altar, a floating dais made of woven crystal and dark steel Seraphine's dress gleamed, not with gems but with old code lines from her father's writings etched along the hem. Ryan wore his uniform only in part. The jacket, yes, but underneath a simple Terran black shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. A man, not a soldier. There were no vows, just acknowledgments. "I do not promise peace," she said softly, "but I promise truth." "I do not promise answers," he replied. "Only questions asked beside you." The officiant, a former refugee from the Illyrian collapse, now head of its restored civilian council, smiled and declared, "You were forged in conflict. Let love be your rebellion." And as they kissed, real, unhurried, without performance, a quiet wind swept across the terrace, rustling the silver root leaves. Somewhere below in the council chambers, a live feed played to billions. A moment not of conquest, but of convergence. Weeks later, Seraphine stood alone on the garden's edge, watching transport ships ferry supplies to distant sectors. Peacekeeping fleets rotated overhead, no longer occupying forces, but voluntary alliances. Her armor lay stored away now, fully deactivated. Its biological link is dormant. She hadn't needed it in weeks. Because she no longer braced against attack. She planned, she led, and she healed. Ryan joined her, holding 2 steaming mugs. "You remembered the jasmine?" she asked. "Your neurostability insisted," he teased. She leaned against him. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" He shrugged. "Hopefully not. But maybe one day we won't have to fight alone." They stood in silence for a while. Then quietly she said, "I want to go back." He blinked. "Back to the fallback station. To that dome. I want to plant real moss there. Make it more than a hiding place. Make it a beginning." He smiled. "Then let's make it bloom." In the decades to follow, the fallback base became the Illyrian Concord Institute, a training center for empathy-led leadership. Every new Accord representative studied there. Not strategy, not weapons, but stories. Seraphine's story, Chiron's warnings, the consequence of silence, the gift of survival, and every year on the date of her reinstatement, a signal lit the stars. Simple, steady, Vera lives, and so do we. You know, it's strange how peace doesn't announce itself. There's no parade, no booming voice declaring victory. It just arrives. In the quiet choices, in the healed scars, in the way someone finally breathes without bracing for pain. Seraphine Vera was never meant to return, and Rian Salas never sought to rise. But in each other they found something rare, not just a cause worth fighting for, but a reason to keep going once the fighting stopped. And isn't that what we're really looking for? Not perfection, not even answers. Just someone who sees us at our worst, listens through the silence, and stays long enough to watch us become something better. So maybe when the history logs retell this era, it won't be the battles they focus on. It'll be the quiet between them, the rain in the dome, the laughter at the edge of war, the choice over and over not to fall into bitterness, but to rise into something kinder. And that's what makes us human. Not our strength, not even our scars, but the way we choose to heal. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment, share it with a friend, or just take a moment to breathe. And remember, your voice too might be the one that helps someone else come back from the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.